At a time when the fields of Bethlehem were still silent and the name of David was beginning to spread by word of mouth, a boy was born who seemed to have been shaped by the wind itself. ASAEL was his name. The son of Zeruiah, David's sister, he grew up amid stories of war, courage, and promises of kingdoms. He was of Jesse's lineage, the same blood that ran through the veins of God's chosen king. But unlike David, who played the harp and calmed beasts, ASAEL seemed to have been born to run and to fight. It was said that from an early age, no one could catch up with him. It was as if his feet never touched the ground. He ran through the olive trees as if he were running away from time, or perhaps trying to catch up with it. But it wasn't just speed. There was something in his eyes, a restless gleam, a desire to prove himself. He was the youngest of Zeruiah's sons, but he didn't allow himself to be diminished. He had a habit of throwing himself into his older brother's fights, even if he didn't know why, just to show that he was there, whole and ready. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you'd like to support us, feel free to click on the "Thanks a lot" button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. The days passed and the boy became a young man. While others were still playing, ASAEL was already practicing with the wooden spear, imitating the soldiers. He didn't just want to learn to fight, he wanted to be remembered. He knew that bearing the name of Zeruiah and being David's nephew was no small thing, but neither was it everything. He wanted his own name carved into history. In those days, when kingdoms were still drawn like scribbles in the sand, ASAEL began to stand out, but not for his titles, but for his attitude. He didn't wait for orders, he acted. He didn't run away from danger, he ran towards it. And the older he grew, the more the eyes of the army turned to him, not as someone's son, but as the promise of something greater. And it was precisely on this path between training, marches, and bloodshed in the field that ASAEL entered David's war. ASAEL didn't just inherit the blood of David's family, he also inherited the instinct to fight, as if every beat of his heart was already pulsating to the rhythm of war. From an early age, he was surrounded by men with swords at their waists and eyes always on the horizon. His brothers, Joab and Abishai, were already among the most feared leaders in David's army, and he grew up watching them return, covered in dust and glory. ASAEL watched them in silence, but every gesture, every tactic, every battle story he kept in his memory like someone who gathers stones to build his own path. He didn't want to be just the younger brother. He wanted to be remembered as a warrior for merit, not for kinship, and this desire created a different kind of boldness in him. Where others hesitated, he threw himself in. Where there was risk, ASAEL saw chance. He was the kind of man who didn't think twice before getting into a fight, not out of anger, but out of cause. It was as if his body was made for action, and waiting made him restless, almost sick. With each mission, ASAEL proved his worth. He wasn't just quick on his feet, he was sharp with his decisions. While many were lost in fear, he moved forward with steady eyes. He didn't seek praise, but neither did he hide his pride in carrying the sword. It was as if he was fighting with a goal that went beyond battle, to leave a mark that no one could erase, a name that would stand the test of time. And as the conflicts grew, and David began to face not only enemies from outside, but also internal divisions within Israel, ASAEL saw the chance he had been waiting for. David knew how to look into a man's eyes and see beyond. When he looked at ASAEL, he saw fire. Not the kind that burns everything for vanity's sake, but the kind that warms and pushes forward. Uncle and nephew had something in common, the impulse not to accept living small. And even among so many warriors around the king, ASAEL stood out like lightning in a storm, quick, direct, impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for David to realize that ASAEL didn't want a shadow. He wanted his own light. In quick conversations between battles, David would sometimes smile when he heard his nephew's bold ideas. ASAEL was the type who didn't wait for fear to pass before taking action. If he saw a loophole, he went. If he sensed an injustice, he spoke up. David, who had already faced giants, saw in him a courage reminiscent of his own youth, only with less of a filter. As the armies formed, ASAEL began to gain respect among the soldiers. And it wasn't just because he was fast. It was because when the going got tough, he stayed. He didn't leave anyone behind. He was one of those who fought in sweat and blood, but without losing the sparkle in his eyes. People like that, in a field of war, become a reference point without making a fuss. A leader who doesn't declare himself, but imposes himself by example. At times, David exchanged glances with Joab and Abishai, as if he knew that ASAEL was still going to surprise everyone. And as tensions rose between the tribes of Israel, a new threat began to grow in the north. The name of Ishbosheth was emerging as a shadow of the former king Saul, and along with him came Abner, the general who would not give up easily. Anyone who saw ASAEL running could have sworn that the earth didn't touch his feet. It was as if he was floating, as if the very air was making way for him to pass. No wonder he became a legend among the soldiers. They said that, in the middle of the war, if you heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching fast, you could be sure ASAEL was coming. And if he was coming, you'd better get out of the way. His speed wasn't just physical, it was attitude. While others needed a command, he was already 3 steps ahead. He was the kind of man who didn't see distance as an obstacle, but as an invitation. The further, the more motivated. Wherever there was confusion, ASAEL threw himself into it, as if chaos were a field where he felt at home. With each campaign, his name gained more weight. He wasn't just Joab's brother or David's nephew. He was ASAEL, the runner, the brave one, the one no one could catch. And he knew it. He knew he had something different, and he used it as a weapon. In battle, he was sent to chase enemies, catch spies, carry urgent messages, always with the confidence that he would come back in one piece. And he did. Fast, sweaty, but always with that expression of wanting more. One day, during training, a new soldier boasted that he could run like the wind. ASAEL looked at him, gave a crooked smile and said, "The wind! The wind follows me." That became a joke in the camp for days. But no one doubted it. When he ran, even the wind couldn't catch up. But war has its own rhythms, and fame, no matter how much it shines, doesn't protect you from danger. Because in a field where every step can be the last, even the fastest can stumble. And it was on one of these marches, when David was preparing his people to face Abner's army, that ASAEL saw the chance to put everything he had inside him to the test. Saul's death left the throne empty, but the void in Israel never lasted long. On the one hand, David, anointed by God, chosen from among the shepherds, was growing in strength and leadership. On the other, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, hastily raised up by the men from the north, sustained more by Abner's stubbornness than by any merit of his own. It was as if the people were divided between the past and the future, and in the midst of this rift, war began to form with slow but steady steps. ASAEL, of course, was with David. Not just because of blood ties, but because he believed. He believed that his uncle was the right king, the man who had defeated giants, survived escapes, endured betrayals. And when the news arrived that Abner was gathering an army to defend Ishbosheth, ASAEL armed himself immediately, not even waiting for orders. It was war. And where there was war, he wanted to be. The battlefield chosen was Gibeon, a land of ancient memories, which was now taking on a new storyline. On one side, David's men, including Joab, Abishai, and ASAEL. On the other, Saul's men, led by Abner, an old man of war, experienced and cold as stone. The tension was thick, like a cloud before the rain. All it took was one wrong move, one spark, and everything would explode. ASAEL paced back and forth, impatient, as if the ground was calling him to run. He didn't like waiting. He never had. Movement was his language. And when the battle finally erupted, it was as if someone had released a trapped beast. In the midst of the confusion, screams, steel and dust, ASAEL saw something that made his eyes fix on a single target. Abner. There, among the tumult, was the enemy general. It was the chance, the golden chance. And without a second thought, ASAEL did what he did best. He ran. The dust had barely settled, and ASAEL was already running. His eyes stuck to Abner's back like an arrow aimed straight at the target. This wasn't just a chase. It was as if his entire destiny had piled up at that moment. Each step was firm, quick, almost soundless. The field of Gibeon became the trail, and ASAEL the hunter. Abner noticed. He felt the presence coming, that kind of sensation that chills the skin before danger even appears. He looked over his shoulder and saw it. ASAEL, the youngest of Zeruiah's sons, the bolt of lightning that runs non-stop. He knew his reputation. He knew he wasn't dealing with just anyone. And yet, even though he was experienced, he was uneasy. ASAEL was approaching too quickly. Abner's voice cut through the air. "Turn around, ASAEL. Go after someone else. There's still time." But ASAEL didn't answer. He ran as if the words couldn't reach him. Abner insisted now in a more serious tone, almost pleading, "Don't force me to do this." But for ASAEL, stopping wasn't an option. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to capture that name, that symbol, that general who sustained the resistance against David. The field, once full of spears and swords, seemed to have disappeared. Now it was just him and Abner, one chasing, the other trying to avoid the inevitable. Time seemed stretched out, as if the universe was holding its breath. And ASAEL followed, closer, faster, closer to something he couldn't quite explain. Was it honor? Was it glory? Was it faith? Or was it simply the certainty that that day he had a role to play? Abner looked forward, then back. The silence turned to pressure. The line between attack and defense began to disappear, and then, with no turning back, the moment arrived. Abner was not just any man. He had seen too much war, too much death, too much foolish haste by brave young men who didn't yet understand the weight of survival. That's why, even though he was being chased, he didn't run with fear. He ran with calculation. But ASAEL was different. He wouldn't let go. He didn't back down. He was on top, like a shadow clinging to his body. Time was growing short. ASAEL could already hear the sound of Abner's breathing, the heavy rhythm of his steps, the slight hiss of the armor rubbing against his body. And still, he didn't stop. The warning cries that Abner had let out earlier were now coming out more forcefully, almost painfully. "Turn around, ASAEL. Take a shield from another soldier. Don't make me." But it was as if ASAEL had turned off everything around him. There was only that race, that name, that mission. As if he thought that if he let Abner escape, everything he had built up to that point would be for nothing. Then, in a second that no one could predict, Abner turned his body with the spear firmly in his hands. But he didn't use the tip. He pushed ASAEL with the heel of the weapon, the bottom of thick, heavy iron. It was an attempt to pull away, to stop the chase before it turned into a tragedy. But ASAEL's speed threw everything at him. The impact was dry, without warning. A dull sound, like wood splitting inside. The spear went straight through ASAEL's body, going under his ribs. Time froze. The noise of the field disappeared. He fell right there, as if the ground had pulled at his legs. Those running behind stopped. Silence took over like a thick veil. No one moved. No one dared to say anything. The fastest of all lay motionless, fallen, surrounded by dust and astonishment. ASAEL's body lay on the ground like an open scar in the field of Gibeon. No one dared approach. The enemy stopped, The allies froze. Even the wind seemed to respect the silence. The dust slowly settled, revealing the gleam of the thrusting spear and the motionless face of the warrior who, minutes before, had run like someone defying death itself. ASAEL didn't say a word. He didn't have time to scream, to fall with a noise. He just fell, a dry thud, an unexpected end. And it was there, at that exact point, that the battlefield changed tone. The fighting continued, of course, because war doesn't stop for sorrow. But something inside David's men broke. Abner, standing in front of the body, remained silent. His hands were dirty, but his eyes showed no victory. It wasn't what he wanted. He warned. He tried to prevent it, but fate has its lines written in haste, and that day they ran faster than reason. Soon Joab and Abishai arrived. When they saw their fallen brother, they didn't say anything, nor did they need to. The pain wasn't loud. It was dry, hard, building up inside like trapped thunder. Joab, with his gaze fixed on ASAEL's body, clenched his fists like someone promising something without having to swear. And in that instant, without anyone noticing, revenge was born. ASAEL's blood, spilled there, began to stain more than the ground. It spilled over into intentions, decisions, and the next battles. That death became a turning point, because no one touches a son of Zeruiah and comes out unscathed. And while the army collected the fallen, ASAEL's brothers buried his body in their father's tomb in Bethlehem. But what was buried there wasn't just a body. It was a spark. Joab didn't cry. Not in front of anyone. His grief was of a different kind, sharp, silent, with the taste of iron in his mouth. From the day he saw ASAEL lying on the ground, he swore that it wouldn't go unnoticed. His younger brother, the one who ran in front of everyone, who laughed easily, who dreamed big, was now just a memory in a hole in the land of Bethlehem. But in Joab's mind, ASAEL was still running. He ran inside him, pushing his soul forward with an anger that only those who have lost unfairly can understand. Abishai felt it too, but Joab carried something else, responsibility. He was the eldest, the leader, the one who was supposed to protect, and he didn't. That became a weight, and that weight began to turn into a plan. While David carried on with his agreements, trying to unite the tribes and end the civil war, Joab kept only one name in his heart: Abner, the man who killed his brother, the man who, even though he warned him, even though he was reluctant, even though he tried to prevent it, took ASAEL's life. It didn't matter what the motive or the explanation. For Joab, there was no excuse. There was a consequence. And so it was that, on one of those days when the mood seemed calmer, David made a decision that put Joab on alert. The king called Abner to negotiate peace. Yes, Abner himself, the one who had fought against them, now came to Hebron, talking about unity, an end to war, a single kingdom. Joab heard about it too late. When he heard it, it was like poison in his throat. Abner, walking free among David's men? That wasn't right. And if no one was going to do anything, he would. The sun was already beginning to set in the Hebron sky when Abner arrived for the second time. He had come in peace, at David's behest, with the proposal to unify Israel. He was confident, perhaps even relieved. After years of war, there was finally a chance to build something new. He didn't know that, in the alleys of the city, someone was waiting for him with another idea. Joab approached quietly, like a predator who knows the weight of each step. He called out to Abner in a corner, his voice too calm for someone who had so much going on inside. He said he needed to talk in private. Abner, without suspicion, followed. Perhaps out of respect. Perhaps it was the custom of someone who has always been in control. What he didn't know was that the spear that had pierced ASAEL hadn't remained in the field of Gibeon. It was still piercing Joab from the inside. And it was there, at the entrance to the city of refuge, where peace was supposed to reign, that revenge spoke loudest. Joab plunged his blade into Abner's body like closing a loop, a single blow, quick, direct, silent. as cold as the feeling that drove him. Abner fell, with no chance of defense, no scream, no farewell. When Davi heard, he was in shock. He cried for Abner. He mourned publicly. He made it clear that the death had not come from him, but it was too late. ASAEL's blood had found an answer, albeit in the worst way. And that evening, 3 men from the same family bore deep scars, one underground, another with blood on his hands, and the third trying to hold on to a kingdom that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. The memory of ASAEL has not faded. A name that still makes us wonder today. What kind of courage is it that doesn't measure up to danger? What kind of faith is it to run to the end, even when everyone is shouting at you to stop? ASAEL left us with questions that are not easy to answer. He died young, in a field where haste and honor went hand in hand. But his story lives on, not just because of the way he died, but because of the way he lived. He wasn't a perfect hero. He didn't think twice. He didn't wait for orders. He acted with his heart first and reason second, and perhaps that's why he was so remarkable. Because there are times when the world needs people like that. People who don't wait for fear to pass before standing up. People who see a just cause and go for it. But ASAEL also teaches us something else, which is harder to see. The line between courage and recklessness is thin, and passion, when it walks alone, can become a trap. He wasn't driven by anger. He was driven by purpose. But even so, he died without achieving what he sought. And what about those who remained? Joab, who responded with blood. Abishai, who bore the pain in silence. David, who tried to pacify, but saw his peace pierced from the inside. In the end, what began as a race became a chain of decisions that changed the course of history. ASAEL's name continued to be remembered among David's brave men, not as a warning, nor as a perfect example, but as someone real, someone who had the courage to run and ran to the last step. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: life doesn't measure our steps only by how long they last, but by the trail they leave. And ASAEL's trail, however short, was strong enough to cross generations, because those who live truthfully live longer than time itself. If you liked ASAEL's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.